My name is Liz Goodrich, and I'm part of the community relations team. And our task is to organize cultural enrichment programs for library users. And we are really glad you're here today for today's presentation. I would like to introduce Emily O'Neill. She is the Technical Services Manager at Deschutes Public Library and co-chair for the Oregon Intellectual Freedom Committee. Emily relocated to Bend in April of 2016 from Steamboat Springs, Colorado, where she was formerly the Technical Services and Collection Management Librarian for Bud Werner Memorial Library. Prior to Colorado, she was the Library Operations Manager of Collections for the University of New Mexico. When not managing a technical services department, which she does very well, by the way, she enjoys teaching hip hop dance or spending time outdoors, hiking, snowboarding, rock climbing, and paddleboarding with her husband and 2 dogs. So welcome, Emily. Today's topic is super important, and we're really thankful for your expertise and sharing with us about the important role that libraries play in protecting intellectual freedom. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's get you all up and running. All right, Liz, can you tell me if you see my screen?
I do, thank you.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here with me today. I definitely have a lot of passions with libraries, but intellectual freedom is probably paramount to the top of my list. So I'm excited to share with you what your rights mean here at this library and all libraries across the United States. As Liz already shared, I'm here as the Technical Services Manager here at Deschutes Public Library and an active member of our Oregon Library Association Intellectual Freedom Committee. One thing to note, throughout this presentation, I will be mentioning quite a bit of content as it pertains to First Amendment rights through the United States Constitution. I know about this information through my work as a collection development manager, a technical services manager, and a co-chair for the Oregon Intellectual Freedom Committee, but I am not a lawyer. And so please do not consider any of the content legal expertise. And if you have legal questions, I encourage you to consult a local attorney. So why am I here today? I'm here for 2 main reasons. Well, 3 if you count just my general passion, as already noted. But this week, today, as a matter of fact, kicks off a pretty important week when it comes to information rights. So today is the start of what is called Sunshine Week. And Sunshine Week was established in 2005 by the News Leaders Association. And the intention is a week dedicated to celebrating your access to public information and what it means for you and your community. Clearly, information has an impact to us. So it seems like a fantastic week to share what your rights are to your information and all information through your public library, which leads to the second reason why I'm here today. Throughout the annual year of 2021 and now into 2022, we have been experiencing, the collective we of the United States, have been experiencing a large number of materials challenges within our public libraries and our school libraries. And so much so that the American Library Association has noted that in the last year, there were 155 unique censorship incidences that had happened from January to November of 2021. In reference, just so you know the extent of that, they experienced a total of 156 challenges in all of 2020. So we have already seen something like a 67% increase in materials challenges across the United States. The ALA, so the American Library Association Office of Intellectual Freedom Director, Deborah Caldwell-Stone, is quoted as saying, "We're seeing an unprecedented volume of challenges in the fall of 2021. In her years with ALA, she can't recall a time when we had multiple challenges coming in on a daily basis." So it seemed like a great time to share why this is happening and what this library is doing to protect your rights. So to start, what is intellectual freedom and why is it important? Intellectual freedom encompasses the freedom to hold, receive, and disseminate information without restriction. It's viewed as an integral component to a democratic society, and intellectual freedom protects an individual's right to access, explore, consider, and express ideas and information on the basis of self-governing with a well-informed citizenry. Essentially, without your right to intellectual freedom, you don't have a right to information at all. So what does that mean? Well, it actually is tied to your First Amendment right in the United States. So courts have held that freedom of speech includes the right to receive speech, and likewise have held that libraries are a quintessential locus of that receipt of information. This comes from the Third Court of Appeals and ties directly to your First Amendment right. Ultimately, our role in protecting intellectual freedom comes from the Supreme Court and is included under your umbrella of First Amendment rights to information. If you diluted it down, basically courts have held that freedom of thought and therefore libraries are under the umbrella of protecting everyone's ability to seek information by the means of their freedom of speech. Another way to look at it, judges and legal experts have argued that freedom of speech is meaningless without the right to access information as well. Receiving information is a corollary to your First Amendment right. So that's intellectual freedom, but how do we have any guiding principles? Well, the American Library Association helps us with that as well. They have a number of documents that help guide how libraries are supposed to be equipped and are equipped to manage that lofty goal of protecting everyone's First Amendment rights to information. Their documents include the Library Bill of Rights, the Code of Ethics of the American Library Association, a freedom to read statement, and a freedom to view statement. And we'll look at each of these in varying levels of detail. The first is the Bill of Rights. So just as doctors have a doctrine that says first do no harm, libraries have this doctrine, which is our Library Bill of Rights. The most umbrella elements are that we provide materials to all and that those materials will represent all points of view, i.e. we don't have, we're a very neutral party when it comes to the type of information that we provide and your access to that content. Libraries are here and expected to challenge censorship, regardless of what content comes in. We are open to all people, and that means access to meeting rooms, exhibit spaces are also available to all equally. And finally, your privacy and confidentiality of patron information is of utmost importance to us. We're going to look at each of the elements of the Library Bill of Rights in slightly more detail. So to start, the Library Bill of Rights. There are 7 current bullet points in the Library Bill of Rights. The first one, libraries and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, enlightenment of all people of the community the library serves. Materials should not be excluded because of the basis, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. Basically, the very first Bill of Rights doctrine says that we cannot exclude materials based off of content. Content should not be a factor in the inclusion or exclusion of library materials, which is also included in our programs. Intellectual freedom applies to all resources, not just books. Interest, information, and enlightenment covers a broad range of possible motivations for seeking information and ideas and shouldn't be excluded because of the basis of the author or creator's background. Number 2, libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Materials should not be proscribed or removed because of partisan or doctoral disapproval. This means that controversial opinions, content, or stances should not be prescribed or removed. Explicit emphasis on providing all points of view, even if we disagree with them. Number 3, libraries challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. Challenging censorship. Censorship is defined as the suppression of ideas and information that certain people, individuals, groups, or government officials find objectionable or dangerous. It is important to note that we are seeing this from all sides. This is not a political stance, but all stances often look towards censorship to make their ideas known. Number 4, libraries should cooperate with all persons and groups concerned with resisting abridgment of free expression, free ideas, and free access to ideas. Essentially, this is saying libraries are for all. It is important as you create your code of conduct, so libraries, that patron policies, that we realize that libraries are a place for everyone, and we're not to restrict based off of a customer's characteristics. Library Bill of Rights 5 through 7. A person's right to use the library should not be denied or abridged because of origin, age, background, or views. Again, you cannot restrict access to the library because of the characteristics of the customer. 6, libraries which make exhibit spaces and meeting rooms available to the public they serve should make facilities available on an equitable basis, regardless of the beliefs or affiliations of the individuals or groups requesting their use. Basically, meeting rooms and exhibit spaces must have equal access regardless of content. For example, you cannot restrict use based off of the information being presented, including politics or religion. And finally, 7, all people, regardless of origin, age, background, or views, possess the right to privacy and confidentiality in their library use. Libraries should advocate for, educate, and protect people's privacy, safeguarding all library use data, including personally identifiable information. Basically, we protect our patrons' privacy to all the information that you choose to use. The next document that the American Library Association provides for us is called the Freedom to Read, and then subsequently a Freedom to View statement. These are really long documents, so I'm not going to go through them in full here, but if you want to find them, they're easily found through the American Library Association website. The bulleted points of these 2 documents is that we trust Americans to make their own decisions in what they choose to read or watch. We trust Americans to recognize propaganda and misinformation, and if you need help with that, we're here to help you with that. We do not believe Americans would sacrifice their right to press or information in exchange for a protected worldview. This one is incredibly important right now as the world is experiencing challenges, because we believe that it is our right to allow full access to information for all, rather than creating a protected worldview based off of one person's decisions on what that protection should look like. We believe Americans favor free enterprise of ideas and expressions, and we believe that the constitutional rights of all individuals, including children and teens, to use library resources. This one's a really important one because libraries are for all. They're for all individuals, regardless of their characteristics, including that characteristic of age. Your rights, your constitutional rights, are inherent at birth, which means that it becomes our responsibility to start protecting constitutional rights from the moment you enter the library, regardless of your age. General guidelines from the ALA. So diluting down what was just shared, meeting rooms, display cases, and social media accounts can be reserved for library use or not open to public use. However, If they are open to public, restrictions must be viewpoint and content neutral. Reasonable content neutral time, place, and manner restrictions are always permissible and should be applied to all groups and speakers on the same basis, without reference to the content, beliefs, or affiliations of those sponsors. Draft a written policy that defines specifically who can use this space and how that ties to the mission of your library, and have an appeal process in place for denials. Now, all of that tells us what we should be doing, but obviously there's a lot of questions about what happens when people are unhappy with those stances or the information neutrality that libraries try to uphold. So that's where the challenge process comes in. So there are a few different ways that individuals challenge materials. The first is a challenge. So the challenge is an actual attempt to remove or restrict materials based off of the person's objections to that content. Banning is when that material has actually been removed. Very often a challenge happens and a removal does not happen. So just because a challenge exists does not mean that a banning has existed. The banning requires the actual removal of materials from access. Censorship is a change in the access status of materials. So rather than completely banning it, saying you can only check this out based off of certain parameters that have to be met. So restriction or removal, grade level changes, things like that. And intellectual freedom, again, is the attempt to allow access to all information, all people, as much as possible. So ALA declares that as a matter of firm principle, it is our responsibility of every library to have a clearly defined material selection policy in written form that reflects the Library Bill of Rights. Basically, we have to have a policy in place that helps when we experience challenges. We have a lot of policies here at the Deschutes Public Library, but among them is indeed our collection development policy, which explains all of the types of materials that we are purchasing specifically and how we choose to get rid of materials, including our forms for reconsideration should there be a need for a review on how we're selecting or deselecting our materials. Challenges are defined by the intent of the request. So if the intention is to remove it, that is considered a challenge, which means that it doesn't have to be just through a reconsideration form. A challenge can be anything from a public comment on a board meeting or an call to action on a social media post, a petition, a protest, a letter to the editor. If their intention is to force the library to remove materials, that is considered a challenge. Here at the library, we have reconsideration forms, which is part of our policy, and it's required to fill out a reconsideration form for our library to review content should a challenge occur. However, if a challenge comes outside of our traditional policy process, we will still report it to the state if the intention is that the material is removed. And we report the content that the challenges to our state so that we can have better statistics and understanding what is happening nationwide with challenges and impact to intellectual freedom at a national level. So as I mentioned, we have a collection development policy. Our collection development policy includes everything that was just shared, the Library Bill of Rights, the freedom to read statement, the freedom to view statement, including a really important area that talks about our methods for selecting materials, as well as how we withdraw materials. And then again, that form on the request for withdrawal or the request for addition of library materials. So we have a clearly outlined process for when a challenge occurs. General policy guidelines should be that policies should be in writing. Policies Policies should be crafted so that they can be applied objectively. So we attempt to remove as much subjectivity as possible. This is really important because our policies need to be enforced consistently. It's that consistency that makes them strong. If you make a policy with exceptions, then essentially the whole thing falls apart. So being able to enforce consistently requires that the policies be objective as possible. Policies must also be reasonable and related to library use. So we can't create restrictions without deeply tying them to our mission, values, or the access to others within our library. They have to be as open as possible to, again, remain that neutral party. Policies should also provide an appeal mechanism even if it's informal. So after a policy has been implemented and forms have been followed, there needs to be an opportunity for a conversation at usually our director level on an appeal to the final answer. And finally, once you have policies and procedures, again, follow them exactly. If you do not follow them exactly, then you lose your opportunity to have them be strong. And it's important that policies be strong when you have challenges. So what is getting challenged? So taking a step back, I mentioned at the very beginning that ALA has noted a significant increase in challenges that have happened since 2021, 2022. I want to point out first that all of the statistics I'm about to share from ALA are from 2020. That's because our statistics typically come out in April. So we'll have some updated titles and numbers here coming out shortly from the American Library Association. But until then, it's valid to look at the 2020 responses. So in 2020, the top 10 most challenged books were George by Alex Gino, Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism and You by Ibram Kendi and Jason Reynolds, All American Boys by Jason Reynolds and Brennan Keeley, Speak by Lori House and Anderson, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie, Something Happened in Our Town, a child's story about racial injustice by Marianne Celiano, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. The common themes of the top 10 most challenged books last year were almost all related to either LGBTQ or race content within the books. So what is getting challenged? We're talking a lot about books, partially because I'm the manager of technical services. And so books are of paramount importance to me, but also they are the main culprit of the types of challenges libraries receive. So 73% of the challenges are book material content related, but we do get challenges in other forms. So to programs and meeting rooms, to social media posts, to our displays and photos, some of our films, so DVDs and digital videos, and then other. And other can be anything from a policy to a procedure to privacy considerations, filtering, access, databases, any number of other is in that 7%. And what are the reasons that people are objecting to library materials? As I just mentioned, over the last several years, so 2021 to 2022, it's been pretty exclusively LGBTQ or BIPOC related materials, often with an underlying element of feeling unsuited to the age group. And here's a graphical word map from ALA on the types of reasons that those challenge reports have identified. So as you look through it, you can see those main buckets are deeply prominent. So again, LGBTQ is front and facing, BIPOC is also front facing. Other common reasons include violence or sexual materials, and again, often with the notion that it's unsuited for the age group. Where do challenges take place? Again, we're mentioning here because we're a public library and we hold your right to information at the highest regard, but also we get a large number of the challenges. So in 2020, the 43% of challenges reported that year happened in public libraries. Looking at how the world has transpired and the challenges that are occurring nationwide, I believe that when we get our reports from ALA next year, that it will flip-flop with our school libraries. Our schools have been getting a huge number of challenges over the last year. And so I can imagine that percentage changing a little bit next year, or maybe a lot. So schools and school libraries also get a significant amount of concern. And we are seeing an increase also at academia, particular to syllabus and the rights to teach a variety of content. The next question is, who initiates challenges? Well, oftentimes, again, it is parents, and that is parents, regardless of whether it's at a school library or a public library. Again, a big part of the types of challenges that occur often have to do with unsuited to the age group. Though sometimes it is just the patron themselves. They find materials that they themselves are unhappy with and take the opportunity to initiate a challenge. We have seen challenges come from boards, administrators, political groups. And again, I believe in 2021, we will see a pretty significant increase in that political/religious groups as a culprit for many of the challenges that we have experienced nationwide. Sometimes teachers and librarians themselves challenge materials, and that seems unique, but the answer is that we all have things that we object to. We all have our own constructs of what fits within our worldview. And when you find that material at your library, which you will, because again, we have information for all, which means that if we're doing our job right, we will absolutely find something that doesn't fit within your construct. And when our librarians and our teachers have found that, it is an opportunity for them to initiate a challenge if they feel deeply enough that it's time to report that. Again, elected officials, and I think elected officials, this percentage will also go up next year. Specifically, I'm looking at the number of challenges that have happened in the state of Texas this last year. Texas has initiated new legislature that has impacted a huge amount of material that can or cannot be taught in schools and public libraries. And so if those are considered individual challenges, that number will likely go up significantly. Well, what do we do? What do we do when a library, when a patron is upset about library materials? Our first and foremost step is to listen. Our role is not to judge or to make any sort of, biases based off of that challenge. Really, truly, our role is to listen to what the customer complaint is. And then the next step is to see if we can't help find something that better suits that need. Again, our intention is that we have built a well-rounded collection that represents all points of view. So should a customer be concerned about one point of view, we very likely do have materials that is better in alignment with their world construct point of view. So our role is to help them find that material and to also help show that we really are a neutral institution with a full breadth of information from all points of view. So should the customer still want the materials removed, then we would have them fill out a request for reconsideration form. And that request for reconsideration form comes back to the collection development team. And that's where our policy comes in place. So we will make sure that the content still fits within our collection development policy. So does it fit within the reasons that we've already defined and established as to why materials would or would not be selected for inclusion within our collection? And then a report will be submitted back as a response to that reconsideration. When a challenge happens, we need to make sure that the following are understood on both sides. So first, we request that the customer read or view the entire material. It is really easy to object to a very small portion of a book or a movie or a website without seeing it in full. And it's often that full picture that makes that one objectionable sentence or that one objectionable moment in time make more sense. And so it fits within the whole of the entirety of that material. And without seeing that full picture, you're not having the foundation to object to the one nuanced moment in time on that objection. So we do request that our customers read or view the entire material. The second moment is that we, Deschutes Public Library, will follow our reconsideration process. So without the customer filling out a reconsideration form, we won't be prompted to reconsider our materials. So it does have to follow that policy from start to finish. And again, that goes back to ALA best practices. The very best way to have a strong policy is to follow it consistently and objectively every single time. As part of our review process, nothing will be removed. So again, through our ALA Bill of Rights, it is our responsibility to challenge censorship. Censorship, if you recall, is the restriction of materials. So we won't restrict anybody's right to content while a challenge is being reviewed. So the material will go back out into circulation and the collection while it is being reviewed. And finally, we want the customer to explain in detail what the concern is and what the suggested solution is. It's, as with everything, it's really difficult to have a conversation when concerns are vague and solutions are not are unknown. So part of that challenge process is to help us understand what the concern is so that we can help look at what the suggested solution might be. So how many challenges does the library receive? That's a really interesting question. So every year is very, very different. I would say some years we don't have any at all, and some we have several. In my time here at Deschutes Public Library, I would say we have an average or 3 to 4 official challenges that happen, which again, for me, that definition is a reconsideration, request for reconsideration form has been filled out, and or the intent of the request to remove materials has been so explicitly defined that I have reported it to the state. So those are the two aspects that I consider a formal challenge to materials. And again, having seen an increase nationwide, we have also seen an increase here at Deschutes Public Library with 9 formal challenges having happened since January of 2021. So over the last about 14, 15 months. Again, nationally, as of 2021, the ALA has reported within just a 3-month span, so from June 1 to 2021 to November of 2021, 155 unique challenges, when the entire year of 2020 had received 120 challenges. So a big increase has happened last year. Out of the 9 formal challenges, there are a lot of challenges that go unreported. And I think that's important to talk about. First off, there's silent challenges, which are anything from complaints not being made through formal challenges to, again, that first step in our challenge process is to have a conversation with our customer and help to find materials that is better suited to their need. If we're successful in that moment of helping our customers find materials that better suits their interests, it goes unreported. And that's an important thing to note because as ALA states here, 97% of challenges remain unreported. That means 97% of the time we have been successful in finding content that is content that represents a wide variety of points of view. So again, looking at our collection as a whole, that we are neutral and allow for all of the different varieties of information needs that are present in our community. So looking at what has happened over 2021 and 2022. On the screen is a screenshot from the American Library Association Office of Intellectual Freedom weekly blog. So weekly, we get a list, or I get a list, a newsletter of all of the challenges that have been reported just this week. So they're maybe not, they're updates, I should say. So they're news articles that are occurring across our country. So represented here on the screen, just last week, there's updates to challenges that have happened in Wyoming, Pennsylvania, Florida, Virginia, Mississippi, Illinois. Of course, Texas has been a big topic of conversation, North Carolina, New Jersey, Utah. And so it is really important to realize that access to information is a concern that has been raised around the country as of late. So I want to take us through some of the things that happened in 2021. So as I mentioned earlier, the state of Texas passed a House Bill 3979 in June of 2021, which became law in December and prohibited state teachers from discussing topics related to critical race theory. This House bill then became an impact to the public schools because it was left very vague and undefined. And so the public schools in Texas were unsure of whether or not the materials that they were providing would be included or excluded from the law that had passed in December. Furthermore, Texas State Representative Matt Cruz asked the Texas Education Agency to investigate if schools had any books from a list of 850 that he thought might be, air quotes, discomforting to students. In his letter, he asked the agency to look for any books that, quoting, contain materials that might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress, and requested that the location, amount of money spent to acquire those books be reported. So our Texas public libraries spent most of last year looking into whether or not they were compliant with the new law that had passed, and then also this new request from the Texas Education Agency on the materials that exist in their libraries. More recently, this happened just 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago now, in Tennessee, a school board officially banned. So again, our definition, a challenge was reported, and then the school board followed through on the removal of this content. So banned the graphic novel Mouse, which is a graphic novel about the Holocaust. And the reason behind the banning was actually that they felt that the mice not wearing clothing was too sexual in nature, which again felt a little unsure because they're mice and it's a graphic novel. And the actual banning happened on a Holocaust Remembrance Day. So that was of particular concern that has garnered nationwide interest. And finally, the two titles that will most likely, there we go. The two titles that will most likely become the very highest on the list of top 10 most challenged books or materials in 2021 have one is titled Gender Queer and the other is called Lawn Boy. And nationwide, those books have been challenged in every single state. They are LGBTQ related content, and the concerns have been raised in all institutions, from school libraries, public libraries, and academic libraries. Interestingly, never has it been successfully banned based off of the reasons that have been quoted in the challenges, which makes them unfounded, but common topics of consideration over the last 18 months. So what do we do about all of these challenges? Well, first we educate our public, which is what I'm doing here with you all today, and try to share why we have the materials that we have, why we try to support all of the different information needs that come to our library, what our legal implications are to protecting this content and protecting our readers. But we also have a national week provided by the American Library Association, an annual event that happens every year, and it's called Banned Books Week. So here in 2022, Banned Books Week is going to be September 18 to 24. And my always hope is that everybody takes an opportunity to review the types of materials that have been banned, recognize why it's important that we allow for them to continue to exist in our community, and then maybe even take an opportunity to read one of those banned books yourself. If you need additional resources, I am a librarian. That's what I'm here for. ALA, so the American Library Association, ALA.org, has a website full of content, including the Library Bill of Rights, the Ready to Read statement, the Ready to View statement, including an intellectual freedom statement that a press release that came out in October of 2021 to help address the concerns that have been occurring over the last year. Similarly, the Oregon Library Association Office of Intellectual Freedom, for which, as we mentioned at the beginning, I am co-chair. We have a list of resources available on our website, including an intellectual freedom toolkit on how to best prepare libraries for intellectual freedom concerns, and all sorts of resources and education to help learn more. And also the collective we of the Oregon Library Association Office of Intellectual Freedom did put out a similar statement to ALA on our stance on challenges and the request for censorship that has occurred over the last year. And finally, as I screenshotted on the previous slide, the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom blog is a fantastic place to see all of those articles and news snippets that have occurred week after week to be better informed on what has been happening nationwide and continues to be up to date on all things intellectual freedom. So with that, I have concluded my presentation, and I would love to hear if there are any questions.
Yeah, you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, Emily. And I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but if the audience members have questions, that's where you would put them in the Q&A. But I've got a couple because I'm curious. I'm wondering, I want to know more about the policy and the process that your team uses when you are purchasing materials. Do you work hard at encouraging them not to self-censor? I mean, to avoid potential challenges? I mean, tell me about that, like the self-censoring that happens or hopefully doesn't happen.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to pull up my collection development policy. Oh, what is happening? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So our collection development policy is immediately available to anybody on our website. So it's under the admin rules. And we have, again, a section within our policy that talks about our criteria. So our criteria is, I'll just list them kind of fast, but relationship to interest in the community, if it has lasting value, vitality and originality of thought, contemporary significance, artistic excellence, entertaining presentation, accuracy and objectivity, suitability and currency of format of library use, relationship to library materials to maintain balanced collections, value for the expenditure, and availability of space. So typically we're looking at one or many of those criteria to include or exclude in our collection. One of the big things is that we recognize as a library district that we are considered a popular lending library. So we cannot possibly collect every single title that has ever been, published or is even going to be published this year. And so we really try and consider the popularity of that material and if it will have wide-ranging interest to many members of our community. So that tends to be a big part of when we will say yes or say no. The other thing is that with the collection development team, if there's a title that is showing popularity, but that feels of concern, triggers some sort of, I don't know if I should buy this sort of moment in time, we talk about it as a team. So it's, if there's a title where, any one of the collection development librarians is feeling uncertain, then we typically will go through the process together and see, does it fit the collection development policy? Can we make an objective decision and kind of remove that subjectivity that kind of immediately triggers when you see materials that maybe don't fit your own constructs. So the team aspect helps a lot when, you realize I don't have to make this decision on my own. We can have a conversation about it with multiple points of view. Typically, I say if something makes you feel uncertain on whether or not you should buy it, that is your little lizard brain saying, I have bias here. And it's an immediate action to try and buy it then. So usually your knee-jerk reaction of I shouldn't buy this is something that you should in fact buy so that we remain content neutral.
Interesting. So I'm curious also, something that you said, when somebody lodges a challenge, comes and fills out the request for challenge form, and that your team, the staff, works to go and find a substitute, something other, another material that might fit what they're looking for. Does that end that conversation? I mean, are they satisfied with finding something else, or do they learn more about what libraries do to protect everybody's freedom that then they say, oh, okay.
I think a little bit of both. Yeah, I think so much of the conversation is feeling as though their worldview is not being represented equally. And that can feel really concerning, especially when they have been told and we attempt to be a very neutral place, open to all, right? That continues to be our stance. And so when it feels like you're not open to all, when it feels like a library doesn't have a wide variety of point of views, it's a very triggering moment. And so having that conversation and realizing that, one, yes, we do have all sorts of materials of interest to whatever fits your, information need construct. If that kind of dilutes that, like, wait, what about me? Because then you are starting to see yourself represented again when initially it didn't feel like that was the case. But then also it helps understand why that material exists of, we can't possibly have material that fits just one worldview. And so realizing that in protecting opinions that are differing than your own, we are also now protecting your opinions that are very important, that tends to dilute the situation. And again, if a concern is of a higher regard, and even if that conversation, what does happen is even in that conversation does kind of dilute the initial intensity. Sometimes the customer, will say, oh, I love that you have, A, B, C, and D book, but I still think this book needs to go. And so often that conversation gets less intense, but a report may still be requested.
Yeah, so interesting. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. Anything else you want us to know? I have learned so much about intellectual freedom watching you do your work, Emily, and it's just really inspiring knowing that, oh, look at it, we got a question in the Q&A. Okay, let's see. Oh, Marilyn would like to know, how do you deal with something that contains blatant falsehoods?
Oh, that's hard. Well, there's the ALA, which is, we always turn to ALA, and ALA has made a few statements about factually correct or factually incorrect materials. And, whereas in an academic library, I can understand why factual, correctness is important or held at a certain regard. Within a public library, we have to be very careful of slippery slopes. So what I find as true may not be what you find is true, or vice versa. So I'm going to put out some silly examples, but they're great examples for when you get to the more sticky examples. So there are people that might believe that the earth is still flat, and they're allowed to believe that the earth is still flat, and they may have an information need to look into whether or not the earth is still flat. And it is not my role to say that that information need is more or less important than me saying that the earth is round. And so I really should not make a judgment call on somebody's belief system, regardless of whether or not I believe deeply that there's factual correctness or incorrectness to their statement. So where it gets really, really sticky is, again, especially in how the world is right now, factual accuracy is being defined in many different ways. And I shouldn't be the one gatekeeper to say where something is true or something is not true. That frankly just puts way too much pressure and ownership on the information needs of all of Deschutes County to be in the hands of one individual saying this is true or not. But the other part of that, and I think almost maybe the more important part of that, is in our world of having really deep partisanship, right? Like we are very divided as a world right now. One way where we can start to learn from one another is to learn one another's arguments. So even if there's a book that's written about the earth being flat and I feel like the earth is round, it might behoove me to read a book about the earth being flat, so that when I have a conversation with someone that feels like the earth is flat, I know the information that they're hearing the arguments that they're creating, and we can have better dialogue. I understand where they're coming from because I read the content that they're absorbing. And so I think it's really important to allow for that ability to learn from one another. And in order to do that, we need to allow for that access and that content to exist. And so it's not my role to judge whether or not something is factually correct or incorrect when I have members of my community that might think that that's true. And I might need to have a conversation with them and help learn from them and them learn from me. So for us, we try not to make those judgment calls when at all possible.
Yeah, that must be, I mean, such a good lesson and good advice. Sometimes hard to hard to actually do in real time, but I know that the library staff is so professional and so welcoming to everybody that I know you guys are able to do that with grace and respectfulness.
We try.
Yeah, you do. Well, this has been a recorded program, so this will be up on our YouTube channel, and I'm going to share the link widely because I think it's really important information. Emily, thank you so much for spending time with us today, explaining the very important role that libraries play in protecting intellectual freedom. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Liz. It was great having you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.